My name is Grace. I'm a housewife. I married my husband Matthew after a workplace romance. Our married life is smooth, without any complaints, and we live happily together every day. I've heard that many people struggle with their spouse's relatives after marriage, especially when it comes to a sister-in-law. I've heard that it can be quite troublesome. However, Olivia, my husband's older sister, and I get along very well. We used to go shopping and travel together frequently. I also have a sister of my own, but we don't get along with each other. I often thought that if Olivia were my real sister, it would be great. However, one year, Olivia fell ill and passed away. The day I received the news, I was so sad that I couldn't eat. I couldn't stop crying until the day of the funeral. And on the day of the funeral, my husband, who had gone to the funeral venue ahead of me, suddenly called. "What's wrong?" When I picked up the phone,
"Absolutely do not come to the funeral venue. Run to your parents' house. I'll explain the situation later, but for now, just leave the house quickly."
He spoke in a breathless and angry tone, almost like he was in a rage. I didn't know what was going on. Why can't I go to the funeral of my sister-in-law with whom I was very close? I arrived at my parents' house with an unsettled feeling.
"What's wrong? Today was supposed to be Olivia's funeral."
My parents were surprised by my sudden gloomy expression when I returned home. I confessed what my husband had told me.
"Huh, is that so? Just now someone claiming to be Matthew's relative contacted us. They were complaining about you, calling you all sorts of names. They even threatened to set our house on fire if we didn't pay them compensation. We have no idea what this is all about. We thought it might be a scam or harassment, but there might be something to it. Anyway, let's wait for further communication from Matthew."
While saying this, my husband, dressed in mourning attire, hurriedly drove to our house. My husband bowed deeply, lowering his head.
"My relatives did something unforgivable earlier. It seems they haven't arrived here yet. Just to be safe, let's go to the police."
I couldn't immediately grasp the story from my breathless husband. I decided to calm him down and listen to the details.
"In my sister's suicide note, there were a lot of accusations against you."
No way.
"It's true. Things like being called disgusting by you or being accused of violence. Baseless claims were written there and made-up stories asking for revenge, and the relatives who took it seriously are saying they'll seek revenge against you and are trying to demand an exorbitant compensation. This place is also compromised, so it's dangerous. Let's go to the police immediately."
He confessed this with a pale face. I was in shock and collapsed at the entrance. With my mother's support, I managed to regain some composure. My sister-in-law talking about me? There's no way that could be true. Even when I desperately searched my memory for any clues, I couldn't recall a single fragment of having done such a thing. My husband comforted me, stroking my shoulder.
"Calm down. You'll be okay. It might be a fabrication. Maybe it was rewritten by my mother who dislikes you. My sister always spoke of you as if you were her real sister, saying how adorable you were. She used to talk about you with such happiness. It's unbelievable."
He comforted me like this. However, I began to question whether things like fabricating or altering a suicide note could be so easily done. Even with my limited knowledge of the law, I quickly understood that tampering with such written documents would result in immediate legal consequences.
"Anyway, if there was a phone call, relatives might come here."
Feeling pressured, I left my parents' house. When I arrived at the police station, they immediately wanted to hear the details. I submitted the recorded abusive phone calls on my family home, and the smartphone video that captured my mother-in-law suddenly reading an unnatural suicide note at the funeral, as well as the furious reactions of relatives. The police informed me that since there hadn't been any actual harm yet, they would enhance patrols in the neighborhood and wait for developments. Still, the fact that we had consulted in advance, knowing it could work in our favor if something were to happen in the future, gave me some reassurance. However, shortly after returning home to my family's house, something happened that shattered that feeling of security. When my husband parked the car and got out, there was a commotion at the front door. I approached it, cautiously, wondering what could be the matter. Here I found my sister, her cheek reddened from being hit. "It's all your fault." There were the angry shouts of unfamiliar middle-aged men and women. On the ground, my father's beloved golf club lay broken, and fragments of vases and ornaments were scattered around. It was likely that while we were discussing the matter with the police, my husband's relatives had unexpectedly stormed my family's house.
Hey everyone, my wife really hasn't done anything. And hurting my wife's sister? I'm calling the police.
In a fit of anger, my husband called the police. At his words, it was evident that the individuals who seemed to be uncles and aunts momentarily hesitated. "Oh, sister?" The two of them standing next to my husband finally seemed to realize that I, Grace herself, was there. It appeared they had come to the realization that it was my sister they had harmed. They seemed to have finally recognized their mistake.
She's a vindictive woman, just as the suicide note suggests, preparing a doppelganger. How could you bully Olivia, whom we've cherished since childhood?
"It's because of you that she suffered mentally and her illness progressed." And they continued to blame me, trying to approach me once again with a golf club in hand. However, realizing the seriousness of the violence towards my sister and the sound of things being destroyed at the front door, my father rushed in and grabbed his uncle's hand, shouting at him.
Not content with just making rude phone calls, how dare you raise your hand to my eldest daughter?
I had never seen such a frightening look from my normally gentle father. I couldn't help but shudder at the sight of him. My aunt and uncle were not convinced, and my father and them had a long struggle. Eventually, the police arrived. They put me in a police car for questioning.
Grace, are you okay?
I was in a state of shock due to everything that had happened, but my father's words snapped me back to reality. "Sis, I'm sorry, it's my fault." I rushed to my injured sister to apologize. My father too lost all the momentum he had earlier.
I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, even before you got married,
he said, feeling downcast, as my mother brought him an ice pack. He was trying to cool my sister's cheek down. My sister took it from him and applied it herself. "Huh? It's not your fault, you know. You might be playing in quiet, but you got along just fine with our late sister, who was so serious. This is assault, isn't it? And we can get money from those uncles earlier. It's a win." Elizabeth is saying this. My sister always has this kind of nonchalant attitude, even in situations like this. She should be upset and angry about being attacked for something she didn't do, but this time I feel like she's pretending to be calm to protect me, and I appreciate that. And watching how she was after I got married, I truly appreciated that she believed me when I was falsely accused. That's why I couldn't forgive my husband's uncle and aunt for causing pain to such a sister of mine and for their violent actions. That night my husband said to me,
I'll gather evidence. You stay here. If anything happens, please let me know.
He said this, leaving me behind and heading to his own family's house. I felt anxious while my husband was away, but it seems that news of the unjust violence by his uncle and aunt spread among the relatives. After that, no more relatives came to my family's house. In the following days, we arranged a meeting. My parents, sister, husband, and in-laws, and several relatives, including my uncle and aunt, gathered at my husband's family home. It was a slightly spacious house. My uncle and aunt seemed to have a somewhat better understanding of the situation, but they still seemed to believe that they were in the right.
If you admit to the bullying mentioned in the suicide note, we'll forgive you from now on.
So please don't file a damage report either. They demanded an apology with outrageous reasoning like this and asked us to refrain from filing a complaint. At that moment, $20,000. My previously silent sister spoke up with those words first. What? What did you say? My uncle glared at her with a puzzled expression. If you give me $20,000, I'll hold off on filing a complaint. The place where I was hit hurts and I can't concentrate on my work. Plus, you need to compensate for the golf club and ornaments you broke. Hand over $20,000. My sister casually uttered those words while using her smartphone. My uncle's face turned bright red.
What did you say? Is there such a ridiculous story just because she slapped someone once? How audacious. If a sister is a sister, then an older sister is an older sister.
They berated in such a manner. To top it off, they turned to my parents and said,
Raising such shameless sisters.
Don't you feel ashamed as parents? They vented their frustration. My mother was calm, but firm. With all due respect, both sisters are adults. They should be expressing their opinions as individuals, not as children. Isn't it natural to respond to a rude person with rudeness? I cannot fully comprehend the fear and pain you felt when you were suddenly struck by them. I can't understand the anger since I've never experienced it. She replied quietly. Honestly, isn't the will more problematic than me? My sister spoke again, seeming to have no interest in her own situation. She yawned and casually asked, perhaps because the will, which could have been tampered with, had caused my husband's relatives to act outrageously.
About that, it was indeed done by you, Mom, right?
My husband turned to his own mother and questioned her. My nervous-looking mother-in-law, who had been restless for a while, flinched. I'm losing memory. My recollections are so unclear. She tried to excuse herself with a somewhat placating tone. Ignoring that, my husband unfolded a piece of paper.
This is my sister's real will. The location where my mother hid it was written in my mother's diary, and I searched and found it. Someone fabricated a will full of lies, making it sound real and fooled our relatives. Who's the fool here?
My husband suppressed his anger and spoke in a voice filled with disappointment.
My mother, in her diary, she wrote cruel things like, it would be better if my son's wife had replaced his sister. She wrote cruel things without any hesitation. I can't consider her my mother anymore.
My husband stared at his biological mother with a cold gaze. My mother-in-law's words gradually faded in front of that gaze, and in the end she was sobbing. My father-in-law, who had been quietly listening to the situation, spoke up.
It's my responsibility for not seeing what kind of person she really was. Son, you don't need to have anything to do with this house and our relatives ever again. Live happily, far away. From now on, I will monitor her and ensure that you don't have to see her. It's the least I can do to make amends.
My husband nodded in response to these words and then turned to the silent uncle and aunt.
Please, go ahead and pay the $20,000 that were offered earlier. Otherwise, I will indeed file a police report with all the evidence we have. I would prefer that, but it seems to be your preference.
My aunt and uncle shook their shoulders and glared at my sister.
$20,000 to such an ill-mannered girl.
Yay! I can buy bags from Louis Vuitton and Callaway golf clubs. Lucky! My sister had a triumphant expression, grinning broadly. Although I disliked some aspects of my sister's personality, this time I felt that her happiness wasn't just innocent joy. Our father's cherished golf club had been broken, our mother's carefully arranged vase was shattered, and I had been unjustly dragged into this absurd trouble. As a family of three, we were left stunned, and it seemed like she intentionally used rude language without any concern for our feelings. Despite the scene, my mother-in-law clung to my husband's legs, crying. You're all I have left. Only you, my beloved son. However, my husband's heart remained firmly closed.
So does my sister not matter at all to you? The will was switched, wasn't it? That's right, isn't it?
No. Listen to your mother.
Can we please stop this already? How much more of an ugly person can you be?
My father-in-law, still trying to assert his point, delivered a stern reprimand to my mother-in-law. I can't stand this anymore. Let's all go. Okay, let's leave the discussion about money for another day. Goodbye. My sister rose swiftly, seemingly scornful of our mother-in-law, and walked past the confused relatives who had discovered my mother-in-law's lies. With a confident stride, she headed for the front door. My parents followed her, and my husband, taking my bewildered hand, led me out of the house. At that moment, my husband said,
"Even though she's like that now, she used to be a normal mother back in the day. When we came home from school, she used to give snacks to me and my sister. I won't return to this house anymore, so I feel a bit lonely."
I still remember him smiling a complicated smile. A week later, as my emotions gradually settled, I decided to ask my husband about the real will.
"Actually, I had planned to wait until you could smile more freely."
Matthew brought out the real document and spread it out. "I love Grace," it began. "I've gone through a tough battle with illness with frequent hospitalizations. Unlike my mother's feelings for my younger brother, I felt that my mother's concern for me was thinner. My father's kindness was always evident, but Grace, a woman close to my age, was the one who understood me the most. Because Grace has become my emotional support, I can feel every day that I can keep on living, even when it's tough. My parents have significant assets, so I want all my inheritance to go to Grace and Matthew. My mother would likely spend it all quickly, but my father would likely understand. I hope this can be the foundation of your happiness." I couldn't help but hold that will close and cry.
"Just let it all out today."
My husband comforted me by putting his arm around my shoulders. From that day on, I decided to cherish the memory of my sister-in-law and live with a smile. I'll keep her legacy safely stored away until the day I can use it. Afterward, my sister settled with my husband's uncle and aunt for $20,000. She promptly sent them a photo list of what she had bought as compensation, along with a letter of thanks for the $20,000. It was truly her way of handling things, but perhaps it was not enough to alleviate the pain of the real beating she had endured. On a side note, through this experience, my relationship with my sister improved slightly, and she started inviting me to have meals together more often. As for our in-laws, my mother-in-law suffered a mental breakdown and aged rapidly. She became delusional, often mistaking complete strangers for me. "Matthew left because of you." It seems it even turned into a police matter. Despite it being her first offense and her mental state being taken into consideration, my mother-in-law was widely known as a dangerous individual. Despite this, my father-in-law did not abandon her as he had promised, and is taking care of her. We have cut ties with my husband's relatives and are currently living peacefully. When I look back, it was truly a terrifying experience. I do feel sorry for my father-in-law who knew nothing about it, but I still cannot forgive the fact that my mother-in-law trampled on her own daughter's feelings. For the sake of the older sister who prayed for us to live happily, my husband and I aspire to lead a long life together, taking it slowly and peacefully.
"She's such a lousy wife. All she does is hang around the house and doesn't lift a finger."
At a family gathering, Jason, my husband, who's hardly around since we tied the knot, said. His relatives would jump in with, "That sounds terrible. Some wife she is." Feeling backed up, he even added,
"She can't cook to save her life, and the house is always a mess. Makes me not want to come home." That really got me. "After the way you treat me, you have the nerve to say that in public?" I shot back. "What home are you talking about? You no longer have a house to come back to." The relatives and he were both caught off guard by my response. "I ended the lease a week ago, but don't worry, I stored all your stuff. Guess you wouldn't know since you're hardly ever home." "You did what?"
he gasped. His dad jumped in.
"Hold on, what's happening here?"
Jason was in for a rough time. "My name's Susie, and I'm a 32-year-old married lady. My folks own a mid-sized factory. Dad's the big boss, and Mom manages some of the part-timers. Being their only kid, they doted on me a lot. After college, I snagged a job in accounting at a big car company. I'm kind of shy, so when I hit 30 and was still single, my parents got a bit anxious. They suggested a few arranged marriages, but nobody clicked. Just as I was about to call it quits, Dad introduced me to the son of a business buddy. Out of respect, I decided to meet him. That's how I met Jason, who'd be my future husband. He was involved in his dad's business, but at a different company. I was charmed by his manners and sweet smile. Turns out he felt the same and invited me out. After a few dates, he popped the question within 6 months. Elated, I said yes, and our families were in the loop. My parents were thrilled.
Susie, we're so happy. Jason, you better look after her.
They beamed. Joining forces with an important business partner would be a boost for Dad's company. We then visited Jason's folks. Their place was swanky. His mom, Mary, who's on the city council, warmly said, "We were worried about Jason being single for so long. Glad he found you." She was kind-hearted, but super energetic. Jason's dad, Scott, chimed in.
In our business, family ties are crucial. Welcome aboard, Susie. Take care of our boy.
He was a bit intimidating, but it was comforting that they were on board with our wedding. Soon after, Jason and I made it official and celebrated with a ceremony. One catch was that I'd become a stay-at-home wife.
Work keeps me on my toes. I'd like you to run the household,
he'd said. I responded, "Sure thing. I'll make sure everything's in tip-top shape at home." With his solid paycheck and generous wedding gifts from both families, settling into the housewife role wasn't a big deal for me. My friends would often rib me, saying, "Being a housewife with all that free time sounds like the dream." After getting hitched, Jason turned down his folks' offer to get us a condo. He wanted us to pick out a rental that feels right for us. I started thinking maybe it was best not to lean on his parents too much. I respected his call and was on board. When he started looking for a place, he said,
I'm buried in work right now and can't help hunt for an apartment. Mind handling that and getting the lease sorted?
"You're sure about this?"
Absolutely. Find something you like and I'll just move in.
So I set out solo, picked an apartment, and got everything set up. Once we were married, we shifted into our new place, ready for that honeymoon phase. But that bubble burst real quick. Jason was barely around. He'd burn the midnight oil on weekdays and be out the door at the crack of dawn. On weekends, he claimed work dragged him in. He often jetted off for business trips, too. My days became a loop of chores and waiting. I'd whip up dinners only for him to say,
"Grab something out,"
and hit the hay without eating. It felt like he was just crashing at our place between shifts. I was starting to question our whole setup. Was this married life? I wanted to be there for him, but this was a bit much. 3 months post-wedding, I finally brought it up. "You can't be this slammed all the time. We never hang out." He shot back, looking wiped out.
I'm swamped. Can't you see I'm beat?
I get it, but...
If you get it, then cut me some slack. Grinding to keep us comfortable.
He snapped. I was at a loss for words. Sure, he gave me plenty for our bills. Given that he was providing for me, I had to bite my tongue. Christmas was around the corner, so I asked, "Got any family stuff for Christmas? Shouldn't we swing by your folks' place?"
No, I'll be working, and they're usually traveling.
You positive?
I told you, it's all good. Sent them their gifts and cards already.
He said, a tad annoyed, and ducked into our room. I was left standing, speechless. But post-Christmas I got a ring from Scott.
Hi, Susie?
He began. Hi, it's been a while.
You think? Why'd you skip our Christmas get-together?
I was thrown for a loop.
I told you family's important to us. You're family now, you should have been there helping out.
My mind went blank and I didn't know what to say to his sudden remarks. I had no idea that there was a family gathering and I thought they took a holiday trip. I'm sorry, Scott, but I was told.
Save it. From what my son's been saying, it seems like you're slacking at home.
Excuse me? I've been on top of the housework, and considering how little Jason's around, did he seriously complain about that to his dad?
Listen, you wanted to be a housewife, so you've got to pull your weight at home. Clear?
Scott added, sounding stern. All I could muster was a quiet yes. That evening, I had to have a talk with Jason. You told me there was no Christmas gathering. Why'd I get chewed out over it?
Did I? Maybe you misunderstood.
No, I heard you loud and clear. I would have gone if I had known. And if there was an issue with my housekeeping, you should have come to me before running to Scott. I snapped, holding back tears. He scoffed.
You probably just chill at home and now you're kicking up a fuss?
What? I work hard at home when you're not around. He dryly retorted.
I bet you're just burning through my money.
And with a cold glance, he left. After that, he became even more elusive. So elusive that he actually stopped coming back home. He was always out with just the vague work text as an excuse. His absence was suspicious. Trusting my gut that he was keeping something from me, I hired a detective using my pre-marriage savings. Thanksgiving rolled around soon. While I was handling chores, I got a call from Scott.
Susie, we've got a Thanksgiving gathering. Make sure you're there.
All right, I replied, then promptly called up Jason. He answered, sounding less than thrilled. Your dad mentioned a Thanksgiving thing.
Oh? Don't bother showing up.
Excuse me?
With how you handle the house, I can't show you off. I'll go, but you should stay put.
He ended the call abruptly. A few days later, there I was, outside his parents' place, hearing the lively chatter of a family event. I rang the doorbell, and a surprised Mary met me. Didn't expect to see you. I just nodded and walked in. Immediately, the room buzzed.
Ah, the bride's here. Heard you're not big on housekeeping. Been a minute since we last saw you.
Scott shot me a disapproving look. Jason, mingling with the family, looked floored to see me and quickly averted his eyes. As I assisted Mary in the kitchen, I overheard Jason's conversation in the living room.
How's married life, Jason? Uncle, you're looking right at it. What's that supposed to mean? She's such a lousy wife. All she does is hang around the house and doesn't lift a finger.
He lamented, his voice rising. The room chimed in with their critiques, fueling Jason's complaints about my cooking and housekeeping skills.
She can't cook to save her life, and the house is always a mess. Makes me not want to come home.
That was it for me. Bursting into the room, I challenged. After the way you treat me, you have the nerve to say that in public? I faced Jason head on. And what home are you talking about? You no longer have a house to come back to. The relatives and he were both caught off guard by my response.
Wait, what do you mean? What's this no-home talk?
He asked, visibly confused. I calmly replied, I ended our lease a week ago, but don't worry, I stored all your stuff. Guess you wouldn't know since you're hardly ever home. Yep, I'd called it quits on our lease and started a life on my own.
You did what?
He gasped. His dad jumped in.
Hold on, what's happening here?
Jason, still reeling, was speechless. Facing Scott, I explained. Jason's barely been home since we got hitched. He's never even had my home-cooked meals. For months, he's been MIA. Raising an eyebrow, Scott asked,
What? So where's he been all this time?
I responded, He's been staying with his other woman. Whispers spread among the relatives. Visibly flustered, Jason fired back.
That's a lie. I've been working late. Dare to accuse me of such a thing?
Scott, seemingly taking his son's side, chimed in.
He's denying it, right? Susie, why would you end the lease without discussing it, and then throw out wild accusations?
Some in the room added, She's out of line, poor guy. That's when I decided to show my hand. I pulled out an envelope and shared its contents, pictures proving his affair. There he was, with another woman, clearly more than just friends. Scott took a closer look at the evidence. Holding my ground, I told Jason. I hired a PI to get these. Care to explain? As the photos scattered, he looked like he'd seen a ghost.
This isn't what you think.
He started, but then Mary, joining the fray, told him. Jason, spill it. He sighed.
I've been with her since before we even met. She's someone from a club. I love her.
More whispers. I asked, So you never came home because you were with her? Then why even marry me?
My parents would never have approved of her. Marrying you, a subcontractor's daughter, seemed the right move.
Fuming, I continued. Why tarnish my name to Scott and the relatives?
Easier divorce. I wanted her, not you. Just needed a plausible reason.
As I was about to retort, Mary slapped him.
Mom!
He cried out. She yelled back. How could you do this to Susie and to our family? Scott stood.
You're a disgrace to our family. You're cut off, Jason. What? What about the company? You? Take over? Don't even think about it. Say sorry to Susie.
He then pleaded.
Please, help me out here.
I countered. No way, we're done. And I expect a big payout. Have fun with your girlfriend, you jerk. He then left sobbing with Scott and the relatives. Scott and the rest apologized profusely. He confirmed.
We'll keep our business ties with your family.
So I decided to let it slide. Our divorce was quick, and the alimony was generous. Scott and Mary also paid me $50,000 for the hassle. As for Jason, he was disowned, lost his job and company standing, and he even got dumped by his mistress. Word is, he's now in a dingy apartment, jobless. Hearing that, I feel zero pity. It's karma. I'm back at work, financially stable thanks to the divorce, and I've got Europe in my sights. From now on, I'm living for me.
Hey, let's get a divorce.
My husband said shortly after my father-in-law, who used to be the CEO of his company, passed away after years of caregiving. Divorce? He couldn't hide his happiness.
Yeah, divorce. Now that my dad's gone, you're pretty much useless.
Useless? So I was just a caregiver to you, huh?
You got that right. Otherwise, who would want to be with an old lady like you?
Fine. I understand. Let's get a divorce. He handed me a copy of the divorce petition with a smug smile, and I sat there silently, staring at it. Please give me some time to respond. He raised his eyebrows, but nodded in agreement. Are you in such a good mood because of your father's inheritance?
Oh, you were thinking about it too, huh? Of course. I'm inheriting $3 million and taking over as a CEO. You are just in my way if I want to enjoy my life.
I clenched my fist in anger at that moment. After over 30 years together, he had the nerve to mistreat me as he pleased. I no longer had any love left for him, and immediately left the house. He would soon be battered by the consequences of his actions. I'm Penny Macmillan, a 55-year-old housewife. My husband is Calvin Macmillan, 2 years my senior. We met when we were young, introduced by a mutual friend. He was working at his father's company. My father-in-law William was a strict but kind self-made millionaire who built his company from scratch. When I first met him before the wedding, he said to me with a warm smile,
Don't be so nervous. From now on, you're a part of our family.
My easygoing mother-in-law was also delighted with our marriage. I'm so happy for my son to have found such a wonderful girl. I'm excited to have you as my daughter-in-law. I was grateful to have such wonderful in-laws. We have a daughter named Madeline. She was an adorable and bright child who often told me how much she loved me. The 5 of us lived together, leading a happy life. Time passed, and Calvin and I found ourselves in our 50s. Madeline had married a wonderful man and started her own family. A few years ago, my mother-in-law passed away due to illness, and she couldn't make it to Madeline's wedding. They were very close, and she had loved her dearly. Before she passed away, she held my hand and said, My dear, please take care of William from now on. Nancy, because of all the kindness you've shown me, I can go in peace. Thank you. Then she peacefully took her last breath. She had been a loving person until the end. After she was gone and Madeline moved out, it was just the 3 of us living together. My in-laws had been a loving couple, so William seemed down for a while after her passing. I tried to do my best to cheer him up and take him out of the house. On the other hand, Calvin was completely hands-off during that time. He threw everything in regard to household to me and didn't even help his own father in any way. He had never been involved in Madeline's upbringing either. He was either out for work, drinking with his colleagues, or playing golf. I believe my in-laws were also disappointed in him. Given our long marriage, I understood his tendency to avoid responsibilities, so I didn't have high expectations. After Madeline moved out, I was thinking of finding some hobbies for myself. Then William collapsed at his workplace, suffering a severe stroke. He was in critical condition, but thankfully, he survived. However, he was left paralyzed, almost completely bedridden. "Calvin, honey, what are we going to do now?" I asked him on the way back from visiting William at the hospital.
What do you mean? Obviously, you will be taking care of him at home.
What? But I don't have any knowledge about caregiving, and I don't feel confident.
Then learn it quickly. You're going to take good care of him.
I could only nod in response. I resolved to do it with all my heart, especially because William had always treated me well. And so, began my unfamiliar caregiving routine. I tried to do everything I could, but tasks like bathing were challenging. When I turned to Calvin for help, he said,
How would I know? Don't rely on me. Figure it out yourself.
Frustrated, I turned to Madeline for advice. She introduced me to an acquaintance who worked as a care manager, and I managed to get some assistance from Madeline. William could only communicate by typing on a tablet, and always conveyed his gratitude to me. I felt that I could endure the unfamiliar caregiving, as long as it was for his sake. While I worked tirelessly, Calvin seemed to be out having fun. He was always absent, claimed to work overtime on weekdays, and working on weekends, never showing his face to William. Unable to bear this situation any longer, I spoke to him frankly. Honey, can't you help with taking care of your dad?
Jeez, why should I?
He furrowed his brows. Because you guys are family. You're his only son, you know. How about holding his hand and talking to him once in a while? He laughed it off.
What's the point? It's useless.
Useless?
Yeah, he can't even move or talk freely, which means he's worthless. You don't have to put so much effort into caregiving. It's not like we want him to live longer.
Do you even know what you're saying?
Of course I do. I'm tired, so don't bother me anymore.
He stormed off to the bedroom in such a rough manner. I could smell a strange scent of perfume on him. After that, he became even colder toward me. One day, I had prepared dinner for him, but when he returned home and saw it, he dismissed it with a glance.
What's with this disgusting looking food?
I made your favorite.
Your food is tasteless. I'm not gonna eat it.
Then, he grabbed the plate and dumped its contents into the trash. What on earth?
Don't prepare dinner for me anymore. I'm tired of looking at your unpleasant face.
I watched his back in shock as he walked away. Since William collapsed, not only had he not helped with caregiving, but his attitude had been getting worse. I started having some doubts. On another day, he complained that I didn't clean the house properly. Even though I did as usual, he nitpicked and criticized me for a single hair on the floor. I held back tears and endured his sarcasm. Eventually, the bell rang from William's room. Wiping away my tears, I went to his room, where he communicated with me through writing.
I'm so sorry for the way he's treating you.
As I tried to reassure him, He took his time to communicate something to me. I was stunned by the contents, but agreed to help him. Within a few months, he had a relapse of his brain hemorrhage and quietly passed away. I rushed to the hospital with Madeline, and we cried together. Even at that moment, Kelvin didn't show up. After William's funeral, he called me to the living room. When I came in, he was lounging on the couch with a smirk on his face. "What do you want to talk about?" Without saying a word, he showed me a copy of divorce petition with a grin.
Penny, let's get a divorce.
"Divorce?" He replied with an expression that couldn't hide his happiness.
Yeah, now that my dad's gone, you're pretty much useless.
Useless. So I was just a caregiver to you?
You got that right. Who'd want to be with an old lady like you?
Fine. I understand. Let's get a divorce.
You're pretty agreeable. That's a relief.
He handed me the copy with a smug smile, and I sat there silently, staring at it. "Please give me some time to respond." He raised his eyebrows, but nodded in agreement. "Are you in such a good mood? Because of your father's inheritance?"
Oh, you were thinking about it too, huh? Damn right. A few months ago, I checked his bank account and saw $3 million in there. On top of that, I'm taking over as a CEO. You're just in my way if I want to enjoy my life.
I clenched my fist in anger at that moment. After over 30 years together, he had the nerve to mistreat me as he pleased. I no longer had any love left for him. I wanted to let my anger loose and speak out, but I held myself back and remained calm. "Well, good for you. As for the property division, I will contact you through a lawyer."
What property division? I'm not giving you anything.
"I have the right to receive half of the $20,000 in our shared savings. We can fight it out with lawyers if you want, but you won't stand a chance."
You got some unnecessary wisdom, you know. Whatever. I have $3 million in the company. I will give you that much, considering you're a miserable woman with no career or future.
He spat out and made a dismissive gesture with his hand. I got up and packed my belongings, and then left the house where I had lived for over 30 years. When I explained the situation to Madeline, she was enraged. She even invited me to stay with her, but I declined. Instead, I rented a one-bedroom apartment on my own. Calvin sent me a check for $100,000 as part of the property division. For the next 2 weeks, I lived peacefully on my own. One day, while having coffee with Madeline, my phone rang. The caller was Calvin. "Hello, what is it?"
You! Where the heck are you? You better come over right now. We need to talk.
He shouted so loudly that I thought it might break the phone. When I signaled to Madeline, she nodded. "Okay, I will come over with Madeline now." And so, we headed to the house we used to live in. When we got there, he was standing with his arms crossed in the living room. "What's the matter? Calling me over out of the blue? You said I was useless and didn't need me anymore." I calmly told him, to which he shouted back,
What do you think you're doing? Demanding alimony from me?
He thrust some documents at me, which had been sent by my lawyer. "It's all written right there. I'm just claiming alimony for your infidelity." In fact, I had hired someone to investigate him a little before William passed away. The result was damning. There were plenty of photos of him entering hotels with women younger than Madeline.
I never cheated on you.
I already have the evidence. Besides, I've heard you've been telling people that you ditched the old wife and replaced me with a young and cute one. You apparently boasted how lucky you were, right? He choked, his face turning bright red as he struggled with his words. I maintained a smile and continued. An alimony of $30,000 for your infidelity should be raised for someone like you, who receives $3 million in the company. Pay it up without complaint. Then you go ahead and have a good time with your young bride after that.
Well,
As his face grew paler, Madeline couldn't hold back her laughter any longer.
Madeline, how dare you laugh at your father?
Oh, please, I don't consider you my father anymore. But seriously, tell us about the inheritance. You did get $3 million, right? He mumbled something unintelligible. Huh? I can't hear you. My question caused him to turn beet red.
It was gone. For some reason, there was hardly any money left.
He yelled desperately. I had to hold back my laughter. Of course it was gone.
Huh?
He looked puzzled, and I continued. Before William passed away, he decided to give both me and Madeline some, and the remaining money was donated.
What the heck?
At the time when I was in tears from being criticized by Calvin, he informed me about this matter.
Penny, I've long given up on Calvin. Leaving him an inheritance would only lead to trouble. But I want to ensure that you and Madeline are taken care of. Please accept it as a gift from me.
Already knowing about Calvin's infidelity by that time, I graciously accepted the offer. Madeline did the same, and I received $1 million, while she got $50,000. After completing all the procedures, he donated the remaining to various charities. I assisted with that as well, but Calvin knew nothing about it.
Charities? And you guys receive a fortune.
Calvin was white as a ghost. Yes, we accepted it as a gesture of your father's kindness. It will ensure we don't face financial difficulties in the future. Madeline chimed in. After all, Mom supported the household until the end and took care of Grandpa's caregiving. It's only natural, right? He started trembling nervously. What's wrong? It's nothing even if you didn't receive $3 million. You inherited the company, didn't you?
I didn't.
Oh my.
It had already been transferred to one of the shareholders. Not only that, I got fired. They said something about my attitude toward work.
I had to suppress a laugh. Oh, right. I heard that from the employees. You were strutting around, boasting that you were the next CEO, but you hardly did any work and just harassed your colleagues. Such a person is naturally let go under the new management. You really are terrible. I despise you. He began to tear up and pitifully confessed in a trembling voice.
My girlfriend left me as soon as she found out I had no money.
Madeline casually remarked. Well, it seems there's nothing appealing about you except money. If you don't have that, you're just useless.
Jeez, you're so cold to your own father.
He started pleading with me as the tears rolled down on his face.
Penny, I'm really sorry. It's all my fault. Forget about alimony and please come back to me. Madeline, you too. Let's start over as a family of 3.
I coldly replied to such a proposition. Not in a million years. You and I are done. Facing the despondent Calvin, I told him, you're no longer of any use to us. Just pay the alimony and never show your face in front of us again.
But,
without paying him any more attention, we briskly walked away. I soon received the alimony from him. According to information from someone close to him, he had almost entirely squandered the remaining $100,000 from the property division on his affair, and had even accumulated debt. Chased by debt collectors, he finally managed to sell off the only property he had inherited, our former family home, to gather enough money. Left with an empty bank account, he lost his family, his home, and his job all at once. Now, he is barely getting by in a rundown apartment, making ends meet with daily labor jobs. Even after hearing his plight, I feel no sympathy for him. Madeline also has no intention of getting involved anymore. As for me, I am leading a comfortable life. Recently, I received the joyous news of Madeline's pregnancy. She and her husband proposed building a new house to live together, and I decided to chip into the project. Currently, the construction is underway. I look forward to cherishing my grandchild and living happily ever after with them.